afternoon. I'm Maria Rosa Vaquerizo. I'm the CEO of the Andean American Associations, and I would like to welcome you to today's program. A very interesting program. It's Peru's new president, question mark. What to expect? We're very fortunate to have today as speakers Hugo Perea from BBVA and Jose Gonzalez. He will act as our moderator to give us an update after the election. We welcome you back. And we will keep having programs as long as we want to keep the audience always informed. This is our mission, so we're very happy to be with us, with you guys today and with our audience. Thank you very much, and thank all of you for your participation. A few words about the Peruvian American Association. It was founded in 1939. It was the first chamber of commerce established for Peru in the United States. We're a non-for-profit organization and that provides a forum for the leaders that are shaping the future of Peru. Please note that our speakers' remarks are their own views, and are not expressions or positions of the Peruvian American Associations or of any of the institutions they represent. We are an apolitical organization, and I would like to continue to welcome today's new members of the Andean American Association. We have today Tim Godell. He is an officer in BBVA, and we are welcome BBVA as a supporting membership of the Andean American Associations. Thank you so much. Today, we also want to welcome a long distinguished list of participants, including Juana Caicedo Selinger, president of the Ecuadorian American Association, Maria Messias and William Sneed of BBVA, Gonzalo Rodriguez Matos of Hogan Lovells, also a supporting member of the Andean American Associations. We also have a recent speaker of the PAA. It's Kelly Bissett Tom of Fitch Ratings. And we have representatives from Trade Peru Miami, from Forum Peru in New York, and major banks such as Credit Suisse, Goldman Sachs, HSBC, Morgan Stanley, Sumitomo, UBS, and Wells Fargo. We have different investment firms, rating agencies. We have some attendants from Columbia University and other key institutions. Now, briefly, I would like to introduce our speakers. We have Hugo Perea. He has a master's degree in economics from the London School of Economics. He joined BBVA Group in May 2004, and currently he's a chief economist for Peru at BBVA. Before joining the bank, Hugo worked at the Central Bank of Peru for more than 11 years. And for 3 years, he was a member of the board of the Tax Administration Service of Lima. Prior, Hugo was Vice Minister of Economy. Now we'll pass to Jose Gonzalez. He's a managing partner of GCG Advisors in New York, and he's a director at Live Invest Asset Management in Panama. He has had a long experience covering emerging markets and distressed assets. Having worked at Grupo de Empresas Econoinvest, LW Securities, Credit Lioness Securities, and ING Barron's, Nomura Research Institute, America, and Barron Securities in New York. Between the years of 82 and 90, in almost a decade, he was a journalist, a foreign correspondent, a human rights advocate, and political analyst based in Lima, Peru. He holds a BA from Universidad de Lima, a master's in international affairs from Columbia University in New York, and studies towards a PhD in sociology at the University of California in Berkeley. After their presentations, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. Please look at the bottom of your screen, and you have a chat button that you can, while they are giving the presentation, you can always start sending your questions. They will be addressed at the end of the program. We will have a long period for questions and answers. And we have also been receiving some questions, and we're going to try to address them as, as many questions as we can. So let's start quickly with Jose.
Thank you, Maria Rosa. You listen to me well. Let me share my screen briefly. I need permission to share my screen.
Okay, so Laurie, can you make Jose co-host?
Yes, give us a second. Yeah, now I can share it. Let me go into the presentation. You see in the presentation, right?
Yes, yes, we are.
Yes, well, I'm gonna briefly, in 15 minutes or less, give you an update of what is the state of the election itself. As you know, the OMPE, which is the institution in Peru who is in charge of organizing the election and counting the votes, has finished its job. But the Jurado Nacional de Elecciones, who proclaims the president, have not done so yet, since there's a number of actas, which represents an average 200 votes each, which have been still impugnadas under observation due to claims from Fuerza Popular Keiko Fujimori's party that need to be solved before the Jurado Nacional de Elecciones takes the decision to proclaim the president. And nobody knows for certain how long that it would take. Of all the claims that Fuerza Popular has made, which are a total of 940 actas, only 134 were introduced in time, 72 hours after the election was closed. There's a discussion about what 72 hours means. They close the reception at 8 p.m. and they are claiming that it should have been open until 11:59 p.m. of that third day. If the Jurado Nacional de Elecciones would change its opinion, they would have to accept another 600 actas that are being in discussion, which is significant because they represent 126,770 votes, when Castillo, in the counting of open, has won the election by 44,058 votes, or the equivalent of 0.25%. That is a process we are witnessing these days. Of those 134 that were received in time, only 22 left to be reviewed. The other has been rejected, but Fuerza Popular can appeal to the Jurado Nacional de Elecciones. They've been rejected by the local Jurado Nacional, Jurados Especiales de Elecciones. Kind of complicated, but those are the mechanics. And that's what we're seeing. And we don't know for certain when is going to happen in the next few hours or days, but we are not that close to have a formal result, recognized results. And basically what I'm going to do in the next few minutes, before Hugo give us the scenarios based on whatever comes of this formal recognition of the results of the election, is what happened in the election, what happened based on the polls and the results. And I'm going to walk you through briefly to the polls and results of the first round, the second round, and then what happened in the second, what the first round, so you can understand exactly what happens. There's also a discussion these days in Lima that the distortion could have come on the first round, which have not been taken in consideration, but gives you an idea of how complex this discussion is. These are the polls on the first round. As you see, there were the indications of Castillo being having been able to go into the runoff early on the election. Was nobody noticed Castillo coming from the back and ended up going into the runoff, as we've seen in the election, because probably we're not paying attention. Peruvian electors were looking for a candidate. Early on in the process, Forsyth, the former mayor of La Victoria, was the favorite. Then there was another candidate with Johnny Lescano. Then there was Lopez Aliaga, and it ended up being Castillo. These are the polls, the 4 polling firms that are most popular, most serious in Peru. These are the average of each week. And you see in that blue bar how Castillo was showing up. And remember that polls are not predictive; they're descriptive. They're descriptive of a particular moment in the voters' preference. Yeah, and in that, in polls, we have to see the tendencies. And in the tendencies, we already seen what ended up being the result, as you know here. This is EFS polls that we saw. I was reviewing the presentation we made in March, in which, neither Lopez Aliaga or Castillo existed, and this ended up being the result. Castillo came from behind, but the tendencies were very clear. This is the distribution of the vote in Peru, highly conservative, which is another situation being discussed in this runoff. How come Castillo could have this thin majority when, in fact, most of the voters in Peru belong to the conservative wing? This is the final result. We have 18 candidates. We have a Congress that is fragmented. Nobody has a clear majority. Alliances have to be made in order to rule Peru legislatively. We don't have the same situation we have in 2016, in which Keiko Fujimori's party have a vast majority, a qualified majority in Congress that generated a lot of political conflict once Pedro Pablo Kuczynski assumed the presidency. It's not the case. This is the discussion now that how Castillo would run Peru with this minority in Congress. This is the results of the first round. On the left side, you see the geographical vote. And on the right side, you see the demographic vote. These are maps done by an architect in Lima, in which he sizes the vote the way it should be seen. In the US, we say the ground doesn't vote, it's people that vote. So Lima is a third of the vote, the regions are 2/3 of the vote. And that's what you're gonna see in the runoff results of why this election is so tight. What happened in the runoff? We're doing here the same exercise. We take the 4 pollsters that follow the election week by week, each one of them, and at the end, almost day by day. And what we saw previous to the election is that the preference for Castillo was very stable. Castillo, from the beginning, there's a difference in magnitude in each pollster that has to do with the sampling, the time, but besides the magnitudes, the tendency was very, very clear. Castillo was very stable, and Fujimori came from behind. She gained and gained and gained to the last minute of the election, and we see it here. And the inventory from which Fujimori was winning was the undecideds, and started at levels as high as 16% and ended up at levels of 2%. And the blank and float, which were very high and we thought would not go down much, they went down at the end of the board. And if you see, this is the average of the pollsters per week. And in the last polling on the last week, it was 44 to 44, with 11% that would vote black and float and 2% undecided. And this is the final result, counted by OMPE 2 days ago, I believe. And we have to calculate in 3 decimals, because really the difference is in decimals. And if you see, the blank float went from an expected level of 11% to 6.52%. So, and most of that vote went to Fujimori. And this is the way we see from the last poll, which is at 43-43, to that result you're seeing. This is the way the OMPE reported the votes. Almost the report was every 40 minutes, every 45 minutes, every 50 minutes. And as you see, the tendency is very stable. Fujimori started with a clear advantage at the beginning, but very close upon the second, third day, Castillo crossed. And even though they were getting narrower and narrower and narrower, Fujimori was not able to came back. And in the top graph, you see the loss and the gain of each of the candidates between each announcement. And if you see in the last blips to the right, all of those expectations in the end of the election that Fujimori will win in the foreign vote, that Fujimori will win, it was happening, but it was marginal. And in the bottom graph, you see the difference is Keiko Fujimori's vote minus Pedro Castillo's vote. So the negative is the advantage Castillo had, which was narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. At some point, his advantage was 0.58% and ended up in the 0.25%. And we do here the same exercise, the geographics vis-a-vis the demographics and how the election ended up. And what you see is it's very mixed. And on the right, you see those in which Castillo got 75% of the vote or more, most of the Southern Bloc. Now in Peru, we say since the last 3 elections that the South elects president. Whoever wins in the South tend to win the election, interestingly enough. And Fujimori won on the heavily in the North, it was 50-50. On the Orient, which is the jungle, it was 50-50. In the South and the middle, Castillo won. And in Lima, it was massively, the majority won by Fujimori, which created this balance we're seeing. These are the demographics and the foreign votes. And this is exactly what I was mentioning to you. Why are we in this tug of war when it comes to the voting? And it's so narrow. It's even though it's less narrow in when Pedro Pablo Kuczynski won against Fujimori in the first round, he won by 42,000 votes. And in the case of Castillo, in the count, as we've been saying, it's 44,000 votes. So it's very, very close. And you're going to see this is the distribution within the regions, who voted for Castillo and who voted for Fujimori. And on the bottom, you see the elections in 2011, 2016, and 2021, in which Fujimori lost on 2011 and 2016. We'll see what the Jurado Nacional de Elecciones does in the next few days to see the formal result of this election. But if you see, in the case of PPK, it was the opposite. PPK won in Lima and lost, and Fujimori won in the regions. And this election looks like Kumala, exactly like Kumala, but and the relationship is more or less the same. So I stopped sharing my screen, and this is the situation we're facing at this point. We're expecting the Jurado Nacional de Elecciones to keep solving the claims from Fuerza Popular. Regardless of the result, whoever is declared the winner by the Jurado Nacional de Elecciones, depending on the impugnaciones, the country is evenly divided when it comes to politics, and that would represent challenge for both of the candidates. So I leave you with Hugo to give us the scenarios based on this moving electoral situation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jose. Brilliant presentation, as usual. I enjoyed quite a lot. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you who are connecting to this webinar. Let me begin saying that under the current situation, we're still in Peru waiting for the new president officially to be announced by the electoral office. We are under a high uncertainty scenario, of course, and this makes really difficult for us, for all the economists who are always trying to analyze what could happen with a new administration. It's a little bit difficult at the moment to be clear on this, to try to set to have a set of accurate assumptions to make an accurate forecast. So the first message is probably that we are under a high uncertainty environment. So we as analysts, economists, political analysts, and all the people around this electoral process, we are still waiting for signals coming from the political actors, mainly from Castillo and his and the people who is around him, just to extract signals that could help us to build the kind of government that the next administration will implement over the coming 5 years. So what kind of signals could be useful in order to have a more accurate scenario for trying to forecast the macroeconomic variables, GDP growth, inflation, the exchange rate, and so on? I could say that the first one is the type of messages that Castillo will convey over the coming days. Will be he the radical politician that we have seen on TV? Will he moderate his messages, his approach to economy? He has declared recently that he is really concerned about the macroeconomic stability, the financial stability. Can we trust in this kind of announcements or not? So I could say that we should keep an eye on the kind of announcements that Castillo and the people around him will make over the coming days. That's the first source of information that we should take into account. The second, and probably the most important at the moment, is who will be in the key government positions. No? In particular, who will be the next Minister of Finance. No? And the other key position, of course, who will be the chairman of the central bank, and finally, who will be the supervisor of the banking system. For the Minister of Finance, there is a expectation that the next one, that Castillo will appoint Pedro Franque. Who is Pedro Franque? Well, Pedro Franque is a leftist economist. He was with Veronica Mendoza, a leftist politician that didn't make his way through to the runoff, but now his political party, Mendoza's political party, Juntos por el Perú, is supporting Castillo. So, but in general, Veronica Mendoza is not only supporting Castillo in political terms, she's also trying to contribute with Castillo, giving him some kind of technical support. For example, she is contributing to Castillo with providing economists or someone who knows something about health and try to tackle with the pandemics and so on. So she's collaborating at the moment with Mr. Castillo. So Pedro Franque, again, is a leftist economist. He's not a radical one, I could say, but he's not neither a moderate politician. Let's say that. He's somewhere in between. He's more like a Keynesian economist. He's always claiming that more fiscal expansion is necessary. That people, low-income people, should have more support in terms of cash transfers and so on. That kind of policies that he has been announcing. But in general, I wouldn't say that the nomination of Pedro Franque as Minister of Finance could be bad news. I could say that's okay. In general, of course, he will have a bias in terms of social policies, more support to low-income people, a little bit more relaxed on public debt. But okay, in general, I could say it's acceptable. And I think markets are also pricing that possibility as, in general, as positive. Not, it's not really very good news, but in general, I would say that it would imply the nomination of Franke would imply a kind of a good signal to the markets. For chairman of the central bank, there are some rumors that probably Oscar Dancourt, again from Veronica Mendoza's team, will be the one that the next administration would appoint to the central bank as the chairman of the board of governance of the central bank. Who is Oscar Dancourt? Well, Oscar Dancourt comes from the academia. He's also an economist from Universidad Católica, one of the main universities in Peru, with most prestigious, one of the most prestigious universities in Peru. He's also a leftist economist. He, in fact, is a moderate leftist, and he had an experience as part of the board of governors of the central bank during Toledo's administration from 2001 to 2006. He was part of that board of directors. Even more, he was part of the directors that approved the current monetary regime that the central bank follows to implement monetary policy, which is inflation targeting. Inflation targeting with a target range from 1 to 3%. So in general, very low inflation. So again, the nomination of Oscar Dancourt, I would say, would be something very positive to keep calms to keep calm the markets, right? In that sense. And the final position, the supervisor of the banking system, is a big question mark. We still do not have any information on this regard, but again, it should be a key position because we cannot disregard turbulence in financial markets, kind of weakness of some financial entities because of COVID pandemic and so on. So, summarizing, from where we can pick up information over the coming days. First, messages from Castillo and his partners, key government positions, and the final one, I would say, is the presidential address to the nation. Usually, every time a new president takes over, by the end of July, he has to address the nation and give a speech, you know, and the new president, give the guidelines of his government that he wants to implement over his term. So I could say those are three key issues in order to have a better idea of what Castillo eventually, if he wins, and I think he will probably, eventually Castillo will implement as president of the country. But I have also elaborated some economic scenarios, assuming that that Castillo wins. And we have two scenarios here. The first one is that Castillo moderates his economic proposals, his speech against or anti-establishment. In general, becomes a more moderated politician. And even though that probably he will still have a rhetoric very aggressive against the establishment, against the big corporations and so on, at the end, he will not change the constitution, because there is a big discussion here. He has proposed to change the constitution. And of course, this is a source of big concern, because why he would like to change the constitution, that he wants to implement a kind of more intervention of the state in the economy. Some political analysts have been very suspicious and are claiming that probably he wants to implement a kind of Chavez economic model here in Peru and so on. But in this first scenario, Castillo, of course, he will try to change the constitution, but at the end, he will not, and becomes a more moderated politician. What could expect from the economy in this kind of a scenario? Of course, in general, he has legal tools to implement more government intervention in the economy. We cannot disregard that. There is a big possibility that we have a new public enterprise in some economic sector and so on. Increase micro regulation. For this, I mean more protection to workers or environmental restrictions that probably will make harder for the mining sector to operate and so on. The third characteristic here, feature here, should be that we will see tax increase, tax rates increase for the big corporations, mainly for the mining sector again, deterioration of the fiscal accounts, more relaxed or more expansionary fiscal policy in terms of cash transfers, mainly, and a deterioration of the business confidence, of course, because the rhetoric will still be very aggressive against the big corporations and so on. Even though that he remains moderate, in general, the environment for the business will not be the best that we could expect, of course. In the second scenario, Castillo, in fact, implement relevant changes to the current constitution. What this imply for the economy? The main implication of this is that he will change the current economic model. The current economic model, as you know, is a market-oriented economy, is where fiscal and monetary discipline has been a main feature of this macro administration. So he will change this kind of economy that we had over the last 3 decades. Nationalizations, more public enterprises, a strong deterioration of the fiscal accounts. So this probably will imply that because fiscal policy will become very expansionary, that during the 2 or 3 first years of his administration, probably we will have an acceptable GDP growth rate, because you spend quite a lot of money, and you know, there is a sensation that the things are not so bad as probably was expected. But you know that you are also deteriorating the fiscal accounts to a level that by the end of the administration, the imbalances are not easy to manage, right? Very weak private investment with nationalizations. Probably we will not have big mining projects or so on, or in telecom, for instance. That he during the campaign, he also said that telecom could be one of the strategic sectors of the economy and so on, and more turbulence in local financial markets. In terms of figures, of numbers, of forecasts, what do we expect in the moderated scenario? Let me first mention that in our base scenario, the one that we released early at the beginning of April, just before the first round of the election, we were expecting for this year that GDP will grow 10%. It's a kind of a rebound effect from the big or sharp contraction of the last year of more than 11%. So for this year, the economy, a rebound effect will lead the economy. That was our expectation during those days of April, that the economy will rebound 10% by this year and 4.8% by the next year. But in the moderated scenario of Castillo, what could happen? Well, it depends on what you assume, of course. But assuming, for instance, that during the second semester of this year, private investment is on hold. Just trying to very cautious strategy, trying to see what the new administration will do over the next years. In that scenario, this year the economy will grow 7%. Apparently, not a bad growth rate, But again, remember that we come from a big contraction of the last year. So 7% is really, it's not a good number, in fact. And for the next year, probably a growth rate of around 3%. This is under the Castillo moderate scenario. And in the case Castillo becomes radical and with a significant deterioration of business confidence, this year the economy would grow around 6%, and for the next year probably around 1%. Again, someone could be thinking, why 1% GDP growth next year? Because you have money from the fiscal accounts, you have some resources still available that you can use to implement a fiscal expansion, a significant fiscal expansion. So those are, of course, preliminary figures, preliminary forecasts for just consistent with this kind of a scenario. Moderate or radical Castillo will have huge, will imply a huge difference in terms of GDP growth. Just to finish, many times I've been, many investors has asked me that does Castillo have enough resources to implement populist experiment in Peru of 5 years, for instance, the whole presidential term? Well, maybe. For instance, the government has now the treasury liquid assets at the moment is around 4% of GDP, and even more. Even though that the new administration it's possible that the new administration will have to confront more restrictions in terms to issue bonds in the external markets. At the end, the government will get funding from the international markets, of course, and with a higher interest rate, but they can get money from there. And the third source of funding could be if Castillo changes the constitution, maybe he can use the international reserve of the central bank. And fourth, Castillo can, nationalize the private pension system, a kind of Argentina, what happened in Argentina during the Kirchner administration. So there are sources to implement. In fact, there are enough sources to implement, enough funding to implement a populist experiment. However, this is a non-dynamic exercise. In a dynamic environment, as the investors, as in general the private sector is well aware that the macroeconomic foundations deteriorates, negative dynamics could show up and make very difficult for the administration to manage the country. So I will stop here, Jose, for questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Hugo. I'll take the first two questions and then I'll pass you on some which have to do with the scenarios you just placed. But let me answer so you can take a breather. They're asking what is the strength of Congress in Fujimori versus Castillo, and what do we think Castillo outlook for Venezuelan refugees will be if he becomes president? Nobody has a clear majority. I mean, the largest bancada, the largest majority in Congress, Peru Libre, which is Castillo's party, which is not his party. I mean, there's this, Peru Libre is three parties. One is Vladimir Cerrón, the former governor of Junín, the founder of Peru Libre, with which Castillo has a short-term relationship. And it's not a political party as we understand political parties. In Peru, there's no, besides Acción Popular, political parties have disappeared as we knew it. The regional political movements with the minimum of infrastructure to allow for this election to have. So there's now a debate within Peru Libre in who really won the election. It was Peru Libre with or without Cerrón, and is Castillo on his own for the symbolic representation he has. And now there's a discussion which has become public between Cerrón and Peru Libre and Pedro Franque, who just Hugo described, And we'll see how that goes between now and July 28th, and depending on what the Jurado Nacional de Elecciones establishes. But that is got to determine a lot of dynamics, and if the speeches Castillo gave during the campaign happen or not, and that would depend on what is being discussed in Peru. If that Castillo breaks with Peru Libre and Cerrón, he might take half of the seats in Congress for himself, and Cerrón will have the other half, and new doors for new alliances would open. The partido of there's two small parties that already has express their interest in aligning with Castillo. One is El Partido Morado, who has only 3 representatives, and the other one is the party of Acuña and Juntos por el Perú, which is Verónica Mendoza's. But even with those votes, they don't get a majority, and not a clear majority to have power, legislative power, to implement significant reforms. Obviously, Renovación Popular, who has 13 congressmen and probably would take the presidency of Congress, because since Vizcarra could not, he was the most voted candidate, former President Vizcarra. The second largest voter is a representative for Renovación Popular. We'll see, this is dynamic, is moving, but new alliances could happen, but all of them would be kind of precarious. So there's a problem with governance that I'll pass that question to Hugo when I finish with this one. It's a very movable feast. And the other thing with Castillo, he's not part of any traditional networks in Peru. That's why there's so much anxiety with Castillo. Toledo was an academic. He was well known. He was a graduate from Stanford. Humala was a former officer in the army. So there was a way to understand Humala. There's nothing to grab on to Castillo. I mean, he's difficult to read. He has not given major interviews to the press. He has not made major declarations. Castillo could be, in the best scenario, as Hugo described, Evo Morales or Lula in Brazil, which, were received with a lot of anxiety, and yet they ended up being okay presidents, depending on, I'm not qualifying them politically, but dollar by dollar, what kind of country they received, what kind of country they left. We don't know if that would be the case. Now, could he be Hugo Chavez Frias and do the kind of things that Hugo Chavez did from 1998 onwards out of the legislative process? Chavez was a very peculiar candidate. He was a former army officer. He attempted a coup in 92. He got a structure that helped him. He got PDVSA. There was already a political crisis in Venezuela prior to his election. Those conditions don't seem to be present in Peru. And there will be a lot of resistance, more and even more with this kind of framework we're describing. And in the case, what he's going to do with Venezuelans, he said in days prior to the election that he would give 72 hours for the foreigners to leave Peru. There's 1 million Venezuelans in Peru. There's no way that 1 million Venezuelans would leave Peru in 72 hours or the months ahead. And remember, Castillo, why does Castillo have these voting and these demographic patterns we just reviewed? Castillo it's not, let's define it as a category, not as an adjective. Castillo, it has no militants in any socialist or communist party prior to this election. Castillo was a unionist from the SUTEP, the radical union that represents teachers in Peru with a long-lasting history. It's probably, with Acción Popular, the oldest living institution in contemporary Peru. He was a militant of Toledo's party for a number of years. He's been part of Peru Libre only for 2 years. So he's a left-wing conservative. He's pro-life, he's pro-family, he has an evangelical base, he's Catholic, but all his family is evangelical, but that represents the provinces in Peru. I was born and raised in Arequipa, so I understand his MO, and that's what he has. Around him, there's this support. So it's very difficult to read, and Hugo's and mine and everybody's questioning, how is this guy going to run the country? What are the role of the armed forces that so far are acting professionally and probably as arbiters in the conflicts and the tensions, but they're not willing for any given purpose, as far as we've seen, of intervene in any way, shape, or form. The mining sector has already said that they would consider more taxes. There's nothing they much can do. You cannot move the mines to Moscow or Madrid or Miami. The agri-exporters neither. The CONFIEP has already been constructive. So the key is if Castillo gets into the presidency, how constructive the institutions are. The same with the Venezuelans. I think the constraints he's gonna find are gonna make it difficult for him to be too radical. And for you, Hugo, the questions are mostly related to governance. How do you see governance and the impact it is gonna have in economics? The foreign exchange has weakened. It almost reached 4, and it has come back some, but not much. So are you seeing much flying capital? I mean, what are your perspective on that? Another question is, can a Castillo administration affect for real the debt to GDP ratio? We have the question on the exchange rates, and I would leave it at that, and then we'll have another round of questions for you and me, and then we'll finish with that because we're running out of time.
Okay, regarding the governance question, of course, there are some concerns that probably, again, the country goes through a kind of impeachment process. However, according to the composition of the Congress, the possibility to have this kind of process is pretty low. Correct me if I am wrong, Jose, but Castillo has 37 congressmen, 5 has Veronica Mendoza, so there are 42, and you need 44 votes in the Congress to remain as president. So the impeachment possibility, the likelihood of an impeachment process is pretty low. I could say that that could not be the problem. The problem will be to have kind of consensus to implement some reforms or that kind of agreement among the political parties, and it's going to be a scenario, of course, of big confrontation because the things that we are now seeing as the reaction of Fujimori trying to claim that there is a fraud in the election and so on. This is, of course, makes more difficult to get a consensus among these political parties. Regarding the forex capital outflows, of course, we cannot disregard that in general investors will be a little bit more defensive. But again, it will depend on the announcements of Castillo. And it's very important that he, in the last few days or more than a week, he has always been by his side. He has always Pedro Franque. He has always been there. Pedro Franque has always been there with him. It's a clear signal that hey guys, look, I'm concerned about the macro stability, financial stability, and so on. Since my very personal point of view, this equilibrium is really weak. We do not know with the current information for how long will Franque last eventually as finance minister. But over the last few months, 6, 8, 1 year, I could say that the most probable, the likelihood of a very moderate scenario is relatively high. I would say it's the most probably outcome from this electoral process at the end. However, the incentive to become radical are there because, and it will depend on how the opposition confront him or try to get some kind of consensus to implement some common program or something like that. Which kind of incentive? The first one is that Castillo needs the political platform of Peru Libre, the Cerrón's party. He needs the congressmen of Cerrón in the parliament to rule the country, right? And the second issue is that Castillo again needs a Peru Libre platform if he wants to change the constitution through the way he wants to change the constitution. He cannot change the constitution by the institutional framework. It's not allowed in our constitution. That he wants to call for an assembly to change the constitution. For this, he will have to. He needs the support of Peru Libre. Finally, regarding the debt to GDP ratio, if we are at the moment concerned with outward trend that could be unsustainable over the coming years, at the moment I wouldn't say that is not the picture. Even more, if Franke becomes finance minister, he has said that he is well aware about the situation, the trajectory of the fiscal deficit, the public debt to GDP ratio. So of course, I would say that this ratio will go higher than the one that we expected before the elections. In our base scenario, we expect that this ratio should stabilize around 40% of GDP. Not bad for a country of the size of Peru. Probably, and there is a big possibility that this ratio go higher with Castillo in any of the scenarios, in the moderate or radical scenario. In the moderate, probably around. I wouldn't say a forecast right now, but of course it's going to be higher than 40% for two reasons. First, because the numerator. The money debt, the nominal debt will go up because he needs more money to keep on implementing cash transfers to vulnerable people. And on the denominator, the economy will grow lower. So we will have at the end a higher debt ratio, the debt to GDP ratio, but I wouldn't say at the moment that this will become unsustainable.
Thank you. Well, you responded a lot of questions that also were posted after you were talking, but in just the 5 minutes we have, so we have a very fast round, 2 minutes for you, 2 minutes for me. I'm gonna respond. I mean, what are you recommending investors? That's what I'm gonna respond. And what will be the role of Fujimori? And then I would like you to do, or once I finish, and to do it like in 2 minutes, your sectoral view: mining, foreign investment, the final sector, interest rates, all the variables that could affect the different, especially those companies or those sectors in Peru that have debt abroad. Just in our response, the odds are, I think we will just place it very much. There was a question I had is, what are, in your two scenarios, what are the most likely? He already said that. And I think that is, the constraints are complicated. And these, if we see the elections in Chile, in the Constitutional Assembly, the elections in Ecuador, the elections in Bolivia, the upcoming elections in Brazil, and in Colombia, and what happened in the US, what we're seeing is basically what is called el nuevo progresismo, is the new progressivism, and that is very much embodied by Biden's policies. And remember, progressive politics were implemented by Wilson in the first half of the 20th century, which was Republican. It's not ideological. It's more that the government, the state, has a role to be the arbiter between the social, the public, and the private. And I think this is what we see in different ways all over. And it depends on how do you value that. I remember in Brazil when Lula was elected, there was panic. And Lula ended up being good for the economy and good for the country. The same with Morales, the same with Correa, even the Kirchners in Argentina. We can have a long discussions about it. We'll see what happens in the elections in November in Chile. And it all depends how Castillo ended up being, but we don't know. He might be a very pragmatic, rational politician that is very handy, and can handle this situation in Peru. What it's real is that Castillo's election is a Mandela moment, in the sense of a Mandela moment, like Nixon in China. He's not Mandela, but it's a major switch that would create a lot of changes. What Fujimori would do in 30 seconds or less, she has put all her chips in the table. She said she would respect the results of the election. Somehow she's not. She can go to jail if she loses the election as soon as as the election is lost. whatever she does in the next 48 hours, 72 hours, a few days, it would determine her political future and of his bancada in Congress. So that's what we're seeing. And just to finish with you in those 2 minutes on your sectoral view. And then I'll pass it to Maria Rosa. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jose. In terms of the sectoral risk, I would say just in the 2 minutes that I have, mining sector is a first issue here because Castillo and also Pedro Franque have both announced that they will implement tax rate increase for this sector. We still don't know how they are going to implement this, probably with a kind of a special mining sector tax, that the one that we have here, trying to get advantage of these high commodity prices. And this is because they need, or in general, Peru Libre administration will need more funding in terms of their cash transfers support for these low-income people. And the other two sectors that I would like to highlight in terms of risk for the next administration, relative risk, I wouldn't say so, is telecom and retail. Why? During the campaign, again, Castillo made some aggressive announcements against this kind of businesses, because they are a kind of concentration in these markets, and we need to reduce power market of this kind of businesses or corporations that are operating in those sectors. Interest rates, maybe I couldn't disregard that the central bank will move forward its normalization of monetary policy in order to give more stabilization in the forex market, trying to increase interest rate to make more attractive the assets in soles. And forex, the big question, I could say that the equilibrium exchange rate have moved up. If we were expecting around 3.6 soles per dollar, probably we are more close to right now to 4 soles per dollar. That's my final remark.
Thank you, Rosa Maria. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Maria Rosa. Sorry.
La orden de los factores, no altera el producto. Thank you so much, Jose and Hugo, for sharing your expertise with us. You are definitely two very knowledgeable Peruvians. And I want to thank you that you have taken your time to share with the Peruvian American Association members and attendees all this very intricate future for Peru. I know Peruvians are creative, and I'm sure we're going to be doing very good programs in the future. So we will continue as the situation of Peru develops. We will continue to cover and do more programs. So we will always have our attendees informed. I would like to, before closing, I would like to thank our hardworking association staff, Linda Calvet, Executive Secretary, Program Director Alexandra Vaquerizo, and Program Officer Laurie Dominguez. Without them, this is impossible. They are fantastic, speakers, how good they are. So thank you, staff, you're wonderful. I also would like to comment that on June 23rd, the Ecuadorian American Association, together with the chambers for Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Paraguay, and of course the Andean American Associations, we are hosting the president of the World Bank. We will have an engaging conversation with David Malpass. Please join us for this amazing stellar event. We will have Wednesday, June the 23rd. You can, at the end of the invitation, there's an email that you can write if you're interested about receiving that invitation. And if you would like any more information about the Peruvian American Association, please do write on that email that I'm suggesting. Thank you so much for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you again, keeping you informed. Good afternoon. Bye. Chao, José. Chao, Hugo. Gracias mil.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias. Un millón.
Gracias.
Hasta luego.
Thank you. Bye.
Gracias, Hugo. Estupendo. Bye.